Good evening, folks, and once again it's time for me to look back at week 4 and look ahead to week 5. And it's a little more important than usual this week because week 5 is not business as usual, where we concentrate on the discussion, but actually where you're concentrating on what I call the midterm exercise. And as though it's not really an exam, it's something I think that'll allow you to put into play a lot of the concepts we've discussed up to now, and to tie up some loose ends and really set us up for going forward as we go into the second half of the course now. So more about that in a little bit. Once again, looking back at week 4, I'm really pleased with this discussion. This is one of the ones where I think it's a little more fun. We do actually get a chance to act a little bit more like fans of the on the field or on the court teams. And we look at how leagues and how sports try to manipulate, if you will, maybe that's not the right term, but maintain some kind of competitive balance so that the product on the field is affected. And the question is it effective in a positive or negative way, and does that affect the business and economic prospects of the team? And I think a great example for me this time period, we're at right at the end of basketball season, college basketball season, right about at what some of us like to think is the real beginning of pro basketball season. We're on the verge of the playoffs. And in the interest of letting you know my sentiments and where my rooting interest lies, I am a Boston Celtics fan and have been for well over 50 years, since I was a kid. And I think the Celtics are a great thing to just mention right now in terms of our discussion, competitive balance and economic development and economic interest of a team. They find themselves, I think, as the results of today's games come in, either tied or a half game ahead of Cleveland for first place in the Eastern Conference, for getting that number 1 seed in the Eastern Conference. They're also, because of their wheelings and dealings with Brooklyn over the past few years, I think in much better shape at getting the overall number 1 draft pick. And that puts them in a really enviable position, being perhaps the number 1 seed in their conference and getting perhaps the number 1 draft pick. What a situation that a lot of teams work for. And here we have that example of on the field and off the field coming together, managing the business for a total result and trying to get the maximum out of what we have. And I think what's interesting is you can see in the material you discussed this week, and as I said earlier, was a great discussion. It's one that's still ongoing. It's got a couple hours to go. It was one I really didn't have to intervene in at all. I think people are really working well together and discussing some very valid points. But you can see different things at play. How American sports tends to use the reverse order draft as a main maintainer of competitive balance. We also use salary caps. We also use luxury taxes. You see in European soccer, in particular European and world soccer, how the concept of promotion and relegation comes in. And all these things are to maintain competitive balance, but they're also to develop fan interest, to develop exposure. There are marketing considerations. There are all sorts of long and short-term business decisions involved. This is a really complex process, and I think it's very interesting reading some people's arguments. And I'm looking forward to finishing it up. One that came in today, one of your classmates mentioned a phenomenon that we've been hearing about in the news, and this is leading into the midterm, so let's get right to it. One of the things we've been hearing a lot about, if you listen to sports talk and read sports articles and everything, is this idea of resting players, getting ready for the playoffs. And is that the right thing to do? We've also heard over the past few years, famously the Philadelphia 76ers have been accused of doing this as a long-term strategy, the whole idea of tanking, right? Trying to lose so you can get that better draft pick. And is that, number 1, in the spirit of the sport? Is it ethical? Is it economically sound? Is it a way to build or alienate a fan base? All those things come into play. So, as we look ahead to this week, you'll find a very interesting, I think, exercise that I'm going to ask you to do. And it's in Unit 5, and that's where I tend to put it to begin the second half of the course. So this week, unlike past week, there's no discussion. Just concentrate on doing this exercise. And I've called it the NBA Owner's Dilemma. And it basically shows a situation that almost every year one or two teams finds themselves in. They're right on the brink of making the playoffs as the number 8 seed, maybe the number 7 seed. What's the reward for that? The reward for that on the court is getting to play the number 1 or 2 seed. It's a prospect that not many people want. It means you're probably not going to be allowed around in the playoffs for too long, but it also means you're not in the draft lottery. Well, your prospects of getting a great player are somewhat diminished. So the question becomes, if you're the owner of this team that finds itself in that situation, what do you do? Do you tank? Do you play to win? Do you play to make the playoff spot? Do you play for the future now? Do you play for the long-term future? What's in the best interest of your team as a business? And I think it gives us a chance to take in many of the things we've discussed. Competitive balance, the purpose of the league, the purpose of the maintenance systems for competitive balance, like as I just enumerated a bunch of them. Your attitudes towards short-term marketing, long-term marketing, growth versus profitability. All those kind of things come into play. So your assignment is pretty clear. You own a team that's on the brink of making the playoffs. Maybe you're in 8th place, 9th place. Do you push for it, or do you throw in the towel, tank, and hope to get that better draft pick in the lottery? I think it's an interesting question. To let you know the truth about it, we had a student on campus, one of the first times I used this question, who through a really lucky accident ended up sitting next to the owner of an NBA franchise on a cross-country flight. Kid got bumped up to first class and found himself sitting next to the owner of the Washington Wizards. So he told him about this question from this class, and the owner told him that that was a really good question. And it was very interesting because this owner also at the time, and maybe still does, owned the Washington Capitals of the NHL. And he frankly told the student that the answer might be different whether you were talking about hockey or basketball. So the gentleman who owned the team, his name was Ted Leonsis. Having said this is a good question, well, that's pretty good for me. And I think we're going to go with that. And towards the end of the week, or maybe next Sunday night, I'll let you know what Mr. Leonsis' answer to this little dilemma was. So that's it for this week. Really concentrate on these things. Make sure you do read the material that's left for you in Unit 5, because that's going to set you up for what the final exercise is going to be. And I've just put that together with some modifications. But as I was doing that, I noticed that it really tied into this week's unit, this week, Unit 5's readings. Make sure you're starting to read those carefully, because they're going to help you as you do the final exercise. And so the reading and resources this week concentrate on the market for teams, the concept of economic development of communities, how communities and teams coexist, are they good for each other, who's the primary stakeholder, all those kind of issues come into play. So thank you again for the great discussion this week. I certainly hope that this explanation is clear. If it isn't, please get in touch with me. The assignment I think you'll have a little fun with. Read it carefully and then go to town is an important assignment. If you have any questions, please ask. Thanks again.